Okay, so next step, how do we get this server to run? Well, as we know at the moment, if we run Core XE, the game will run as per normal and we could start setting up to ride our bikes around. But we don't want to do that, of course. We want it to run as a dedicated server. So the dedicated server itself will give us the ability to put in the parameters that we want the server to run. For example, what type of bikes, what type of tracks, whether or not you can use assists, how long races are going to be, and all that kind of information. Okay, so what we want to do first is we want to actually create a new text document. Okay, and I'm going to call it dedicated ini. Okay, and delete off the .text. So basically I'm changing the suffix there to .ini instead of .text. It's possible that your computer won't show the suffix there, the .text anyway. And I'll show you how to get around that problem in a minute. But when you do change it to ini, you'll get this warning box telling you that the file name extension is being changed, and therefore it might not be unusable. Well, it might not be usable as a text file, but I don't want it to be anyway. Okay, it's got to be this ini file. So am I sure I want to change it? Yes. I can still open that as a notepad item anyway and make changes to it and save it as an ini anyway. If you created it as a text document and you can't change the suffix there directly, then you can save as and actually change this to all files, okay, and then type in dedicated.ini and it will then save as an ini file. We're just going to leave this blank at the moment. On the next video after this one, I'll show you how to fill in the information you need there. But at the moment we want to make this Core EXE program run as a dedicated server. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a shortcut to it. Okay, and then I'm going to rename the shortcut just to keep everything nice and simple. That it's called Start Server. There you go. It couldn't be more simple than that. If I want to start a server, I double click that. Okay, but at the moment all that's doing is pointing to the Core XE problem, which will run Core and allow you to ride your bikes around. So what we want to do is we want to modify the Core program so that it takes into account, one, that it's going to run as a dedicated server, and two, that it's going to run that server with the parameters we've specified in the dedicated ini. So how do we do that? Well, again, it's quite simple. Just right click on the shortcut, go to properties. At the moment the target is to run that Core EXE, so if I double clicked on there it would just run that, but I want to tell it to run as a server. So to do that I put this in a space and then the minus, dedicated, and then the port number 10510, which is the Master GP Bikes port server. So what we're doing there is we're telling it to run as a dedicated server using that port. Just a word of warning at this point is, if you find that you can't run your game as you know, to ride in it at the same time as running a dedicated server, it could be because they are both using port 10510. In that case you may want to change this port here to use one that is already covered by the range of ports you opened in the earlier tutorial here. And certainly if you wanted to run two dedicated servers on one machine, then you're better off splitting the port numbers to something different each time. Okay. The next thing we want to do is, we'll just recap on this. Okay, so we're looking in volume E, so that'll be whatever hard drive or whatever partition you've installed your server onto. In my case it was a file called Dedi server, okay, and it wants to run the program core exe but as a server, and we also want to run it as a server with the parameters listed in dedicated ini. And in that case we add another line of commands on here, which is minus set params, okay, as in set parameters, okay, dedicated.ini. Okay, so we're telling it to set the parameters as listed in dedicated ini, and that's it. Simple. Okay, and we can even test this now. We can start the server, and you'll see instead of the game running, you'll see a server window opening. At the moment it's got all default settings in it. Session name, maximum clients 20, bandwidth's low, okay, we'll talk about that one later, and the default track and the default category and time and race length and weather and all that kind of stuff. But the great thing about that is we can see that it's working. You may well at this point get your firewall popping up and saying that it's trying to speak to the internet. Okay, so you must select yes on that, otherwise no one will be able to join your server, and it's possible that nobody can see your server anyway. Okay, and when you're happy with that, you can just quit that. So we know that that's working fine at this point. In the next episode we'll talk about how to populate this dedicated ini to list all the parameters you want for your race.